What's up, everybody? Mr. Forrest here. A lot of you were asking me at camps about Mike's story. We're going to do Mike's story in 5 parts, like we did at our church for VBS. So if you want to hear parts 2, 3, 4, and 5, stay tuned. I'll be uploading those in the future, but for now, I hope you enjoy part 1. Please leave a like and subscribe to my video. If you want to say hi to me, feel free to comment down below. I look forward to hearing what happens. Mr. Forrest out. The unique group that was made up of Mike, Ed, Sheila, and Steve wanted a name for themselves. I know, Mike said, why not the Marvelous Mob? Nah, Steve said, I like the Curious Crew. Sheila said, what about the Peculiar Posse? And then they heard, how about the uncanny, outlandish, weird but wonderful, atypical, eccentric, idiosyncratic, irregular, complimentary company of ice cream loving, pizza eating, snake hunting, bike riding, candy guzzling, human individuals who when put together make the most perfectest team in the galaxular region of the universe. At the same time, everyone looked at him and said, Ed, you're so weird. They decided to call themselves Mess. Number 1, because they were a mess, but number 2, because it used the first letter of all of their names. Mike, Ed, Sheila, and Steve. So they called themselves Mess. They were so excited about summer. No school, no homework, no bullies like Chad or Joseph or Rosa. No football, no basketball, no extracurricular activities. They would go to each other's houses every day. They'd have cookouts. They would go to the 7-Eleven and eat Big Bites and drink Slurpees and play the Skittle Drool game. They would ride their bikes to the pond. It was going to be the greatest summer of their lives. One Monday afternoon, they went to the Giant Rice Landis Weiss Mart to get some lime-flavored jelly beans. And they were doing what they always did. They always argued over who would go in the store first. And of course, Mike tried to go in first, and as soon as he went, Sheila said, hey, you went first last time, I want to go. And while the two were arguing, Steve sneaked in behind them and almost went into the store, but Mike saw him and reached out and grabbed him and picked him up and body slammed him. And then Sheila started whipping them with her ponytail. Let me explain. Sheila was normally calm and chill, but when she ate this certain kind of candy called cowtails, it would make her super hyper. And she would do Ed things, like swing from a rope and yell at people walking by, I'm a piñata, who wants some candy? Or she would do 500 push-ups in a row saying, I'm stronger than your mama, I'm stronger than your mama, I'm stronger than your mama. But usually she would take her braid, she always wore her hair in one long braid ponytail, and she would whip people with it, and she called it getting cowtailed. She would cowtail someone and say, you been cowtailed, punk. Or, you like the cowtail, fool? Have another. And she'd whip him. So the boys were wrestling on the ground, and she's whipping them with her cowtail, and all of a sudden, Ed comes flying in like Superman, does a flip, and lands on his feet. Everybody was shocked. Ed was shocked. Here's what happened. Ed was the weird one, and he was trying to smell the chewing gum that was on the sidewalk like he always did. And this particular chewing gum, because it was so hot, it was all sticky, and this was a new kind of chewing gum with extra elasticity, and he pulled on the chewing gum, and he pulled, and it snapped and went flying out of his hands and hit an old lady who was walking across the parking lot, and she stumbled in front of the car, and the car swerved out of the way because he didn't want to hit her, and he accidentally hit a shopping cart, and the shopping cart went barreling toward Ed, took out his legs, sent him flying and flipping through the air, and just by chance he landed on his feet. Ed was so proud of himself, he started patting himself on the back. He congratulated himself. He took a bow, and he started doing the Ed dance. And then all of a sudden, a red light started flashing, and they heard an alarm, and everybody looked around. And the manager came running toward them, and he was screaming, "You!" And Mike was used to being in trouble, so Mike was like, "Me?" And he was like, "Not you! You!" And he pointed right at Ed. And he said, "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to do the Ed dance in your store. It's just that when I see bubblegum on the sidewalk, I'm so curious as to what flavor it used to be and what the previous chewer's breath smelled like. And I tried to get off the sidewalk, but it was so hot. It was this new kind of gum. It snapped out of my hands and hit an old lady who stumbled in front of a car. And the car swerved and hit a shopping cart, undercut me, sent me flipping through the air, and I never landed on my feet. I was just so proud of myself for landing on my feet. I promise I'll never do the Ed dance in your store again. Until next time." The guy was like, He's the weird one, isn't he? All the kids. Don't you get it, kid? You're our 1 millionth customer. I'm sorry, I'll never be the 1 millionth customer again. Stop apologizing. You win. Sheila said, well, what does he win? You and 5 of your friends get an all-expense-paid trip to, yeah, the incredible. Where is it? Where is it? The amazing? What? Jamaica? Hawaii? Where? Churchill, Manitoba. Huh? You'll love it. That's where I'm from. I'll go drop the paperwork. And the manager went scurrying away. What did he say? One of them said, I think he said a church on a hill with a banana. No, that's not what he said. He said a sled hill in Panama. There's no sled hills in Panama. He said medicine for your stomach after you eat an empanada. Ed said, no. He said Churchill, Manitoba. Ed had studied about Churchill, and it was his dream come true. They were so excited, they ran home and told Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. And Mrs. Johnson was doing the dishes, and she was so shocked, she dropped one of the dishes. They ran into the garage where Ed's dad was working on a car, and he was so shocked, he squirted himself in the eye with oil. They went into the living room, and they all talked about it, and they were all super excited. And Mrs. Johnson said, wait, hang on. The guy said you and 5 people, where there's you, me, your dad. Mary's on a missions trip this summer. Where are we going to find 3 more people to go with us? Mike went, ahem. Steve fluffed his hair. Sheila batted her eyes. Ed said, I know. Steve, Mike, Sheila. Yeah? Do you know anyone I could bring? Just kidding. Of course I'm bringing you guys with me. This is our summer together, remember? The kids were so excited. They packed everything they needed for the adventure of a lifetime, for an incredible journey, for an Arctic chill. The day came and they were so excited. They boarded a huge plane and they flew to Seattle, and the plane was awesome. They had all kinds of snacks to eat, different meals they could order. They each had their own personal TV with hundreds of movies to choose from. They watched Despicable Me 2. They watched Finding Dory. They watched Looney Tunes. They were having so much fun. They landed in Seattle and they got on their next flight to Winnipeg. And this one was bad. The plane was small. Mike's knees were scrunched. The only snack they had were those buttered pretzels that hurt your stomach. When they landed, they were so glad to get off the plane, and Mike's knees were so sore, and he said, boy, I'm so glad we're here in Churchill. And Mr. Johnson said, Churchill? We still have 1,000 kilometers. Not another plane ride. Nope, not another plane ride. Car? Nope, we're not going by car. How are we going to get there? A 2-day train ride. 2 days! The kids thought it was going to be the most boring train ride ever. It was anything but. 2 days of subarctic beauty. For 2 hours, they just wanted to look out the window and see God's creation. It was incredible. The kids were having so much fun. The only drawback was on the train, they didn't serve real food. They only served microwave food. And Hot Pockets did strange things to Mike's stomach that made his toots smell like a cross between nuclear waste and pepper spray. And they begged Mike to eat the trail mix instead. That night the kids were playing cards, and Ed actually won. Ed never won at cards. He usually just licked the cards and stuck them to himself like this, and saw how many cards he could stick all over his body. Well, this particular time he sneezed, and he was like, Achoo! And all the cards went boonk, and fell in a perfect row, a perfect winning hand. Sheila said, Ed, you won. He said, I did? I mean, of course I did. And he started doing the Ed dance. And then he stopped. And he looked out the window. And he ran to the window. And normally, Ed ran to the window often to do weird things like lick the window to see what it tastes like, or blow his nose on the window and sculpt his snot to look like a fat Elvis. But he wasn't doing any of that stuff. He was just looking out the window, and the other kids were curious, so they ran to the window, and what they saw took their breath away. They saw the northern lights, Aurora Borealis. It was magical, and the stars above were magical. And Steve was thinking, this night is magical. And Sheila was looking at Steve's hair thinking, his hair is magical. Ed was chewing some gum he found underneath his seat, and he was like, this gum is magical. Mike was eating a Hot Pocket going, this Hot Pocket is magical. And suddenly, they smelled something that made them gag. Oh, Mike! Mike, couldn't you just go to the bathroom or something? I can't help it, guys. I'm digestively challenged. Olive Mess cracked up, and then this weird guy stumbled into their train car. And Steve thought he looked worried, and Mike thought he looked confused, but Sheila thought he looked angry, maybe evil. And he turned around and he ran out, and they thought he ran out because he was in the wrong car and just leaving, or maybe because he smelled Mike's explosion. But he did look a little worried, and as he left, Sheila thought she saw underneath his jacket a gun. She wasn't sure, so she didn't tell anyone, but she tucked that memory away for later. The next day, they stopped in Thompson. They had a 5-hour layover in this town, and 5 hours until the train left again. So they begged Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, could we please go to the mall? They said, yes, but you have to be back in 5 hours, because once the train leaves, it's gone. They said, we promise, and they went to the mall, and they goofed around. They all bought their favorite snacks. Sheila bought Mike and Ike's. Ed bought Red Vines. Steve bought trail mix. Mike bought Hot Pockets. They goofed around and tried on silly clothes. Steve tried on blue cowboy boots with a pink cowboy hat. Sheila tried on a white dress that was as much like a wedding dress as anything she's ever worn. And in her mind, she was standing at the altar. Steve put the ring on her finger. The pastor said, you may kiss the bride. Sheila leaned in and, Sheila, what are you doing? She turned around. She was standing on her tippy toes kissing the mirror. She said, none of your business, Mike. Go away. The kids walked and chased each other and played the Skittles drool game with Mike and Ike's. Do you know what the Skittles drool game is? It's when you eat a bunch of Skittles or Mike and Ike's or fruity candies, it makes your saliva really thick, and you lean over and you drool and see how far you can get it and still suck it back in. And the person who gets it the farthest without it breaking and still suck it back in wins. You guys can guess who made that game up? And you can guess who won every time? Yes. And they're playing the Skittles drool game, and they got back to the train station. Too late. The train had already started moving. Steve shouted, run! All the kids ran as fast as they could toward the train. The train starts slow and picks up more and more speed. It was still going kind of slow, and they were catching up to the train, but Steve and Sheila were the fastest. So they got to the train first, but they weren't going to leave their friends behind. They held out their hands and they said, run! And next came Ed. And Ed ran as fast as he could, and they grabbed his hands and they pulled him in, but pretty far back was Mike. Mike was the biggest kid in school and not necessarily the fastest. Mike ran as fast as his large frame would carry him, but he wasn't gaining fast enough. The train was picking up more and more speed. And they're like, come on, Mike, push it, Mike. And they held out their hands, but it was no use. Mike was still a ways off. They tried to act like Mike's football coach, saying, give it all you got, son. Is that all you got? And Mike started pushing and he started catching up, but he was still out of reach. Steve said, I know. Grab my belt. And they grabbed Steve's belt and they lowered him down. And he reached out his hand, and Mike ran as fast as he could. He was already covered in sweat, and he reached for Steve's hand, but he missed, and he fell behind again. Come on, Mike, hustle! And Mike ran as fast as he could and started catching up to the train again, and Steve reached out his hand, and Mike reached out for Steve's hand, but he missed. Mike was starting to get so tired, he didn't know if he had anything left in him. They leaned Steve way over. He said, come on, Mike. And Mike ran as fast as he could, and he knew this was the last sprint he had in him, and he reached out his hand. But they got him, and they pulled him in, and they pulled Mike in, and everyone's like, whew. And then Mike fell, and Steve reached out and grabbed him. Mike's face was inches from the tracks. The wheels from the train were pelting him in the face with pebbles and with dust, and Mike yelled out, don't let me die. I have Hot Pockets! And they pulled, and they pulled, and they pulled him up. And all the kids collapsed and fell to the floor. Just then Mr. and Mrs. Johnson came in. What happened? They told him the story. Nobody wanted to do anything except go back to the train car and rest and drink water. No one spoke for 20 minutes. And then Mike broke the silence and he said, Guys, I could have died. Sheila said, I'll say every time you eat a Hot Pocket, it smells like something died. Ed said, Mike, he was reading Ephesians 2. He had a pocket Bible he carried with him. And he said, Mike, you already are dead. And he read to him Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 1. He thought about it for a while. To be spiritually dead means to be cold and empty and lifeless inside. And because he's a sinner, he's spiritually dead. Sin is anything we, say it with me guys, do, say, or think that breaks God's law. And Mike was a sinner, and Mike knew that he was a sinner. You see, in order to stay on the football team, he had to make good grades, and he wasn't good in school, so he would cheat in school. Mike was known to be a big-time liar. He lied to get himself out of trouble. He lied to make himself look good. He just lied all the time. Mike would talk back to his parents and disrespect his parents. Mike was a bully. He was the biggest kid in school, so if someone got in his way, he'd push them out of the way. He'd make fun of people if they were different than him. Mike would hurt people. He'd get in fights. He'd punch people. Mike was a sinner. And because he was a sinner, he was spiritually dead. But not only that, Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 12. Because he was a sinner, he was separated from God. Ed said, as far above as the stars are above Aurora Borealis, even farther you are separated from God because of your sin. And then Ed read Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 3. You see, it's not just Mike. All of mankind is under sin. That means me, but that also means you, and that means you, and that means you, and that means you. All of mankind is under sin, and because we're sinners, we're naturally, spiritually dead and separated from God. They talked about this for an hour, and that night Mike went to bed thinking about it. But they did get plenty of sleep. It's a good thing, though, because the next day, they woke up in Churchill, and they were ready for the adventure of their lives. You want to find out what happens? Stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll find out what happens to mess next time. But for now, I want to talk to you about our first truth from Ephesians 2. The first truth is this. As Mike learned, number one, I am a sinner. Do you remember Ephesians 2 talks about all mankind being under sin? That includes you, and that includes me. So our first truth is, I am a sinner. Don't forget it. Be thinking about it. We're going to learn some more next time. I can't wait to see you then. In the meantime, don't forget to hit like. If you've seen me at camps, if you've heard me preach before, don't forget to say hi down below. I'd love to hear from you guys. And don't forget to subscribe so you know when the second day of mess is published online. Guys, thanks so much for stopping in. It's now time for Mr. Forrest out.